I'm Scott. Welcome to Scott's Camera Talk by Scott. We've been talking a lot about buying your very first camera, and we've had about 6 or 7 videos so far. Last video, we talked about brands and how when you pick a brand, you want to be aware, pick a brand you're going to be happy with, because once you started investing money in your camera gear, to move to another brand is a major haul. I was talking to a guy at a conference about 2 months ago now, and he was making that transition. He said, I have thousands and thousands of dollars I spent on lenses for one brand, and now I have to rebuy them all. And he said, I can't believe I did this. I said, well, your choice, guy. You could have stuck with your original brand. So let's talk a little bit about lenses. And I'm going to start by talking about characteristics of lenses, and then we're going to talk about the types of lenses you'll see out there and what you want to consider and what you might want to think about in terms of your first couple lenses. So when you look at a lens, there's really 2 big things you want to look at. One is what's called the focal length. That's a number measured in millimeters. It can range all the way from, as seen as low as 8 all the way up to 1,000. And it's basically how zoomed in or zoomed out is that lens. If it's 8, it means a really, really wide field of view. It's a wide angle lens. You get a really big, wide picture, but nothing's really close up. If I'm at 1,000 millimeters, that's really, really close up. You're shooting like hundreds of yards away at that point. Now, when you look at a lens, it may have a single value, 30, 50, 75, 100, 200, 400, or it may have a range. If it's a range, it's what they call a zoom lens, which means you can do a variety of different lengths. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the types of lenses. So millimeters is, you see 70 millimeters, that's how zoomed in or zoomed out you are. The other thing is you'll see f-stop, and this is a number. It typically ranges, it's going to have a bottom number and a top number, and the bottom number is going to typically be between 1.0 and 1.4 and maybe high as 4. And the big number is the top value. And this is the aperture. And we haven't talked about the aperture. A lens has a little iris on it, which opens and closes, which lets in light. And the more you open or close it, the more it's open, the more light that gets in. And the more you close it, the less light that gets in. And it's always a balancing act when you shoot pictures. When you do it all the way open, that's a low number, interesting, big opening, small number, like an f2.0 or a 1.4. You're getting lots of light in, and it works really, really well in the dark, and your colors tend to be really vibrant. If that's really closed, if it's like a number of, say, 22 or 18 or some number like that, it's closed really small, and you're not letting a lot of light in, which is great in really broad daylight. But there's an other side to this as well. When you have that aperture, that iris, open all the way and you're taking pictures, your focus range of things that stay in focus is relatively short. So if I have that open all the way to 1.4 and I focus on something, anything that's not at that distance or within maybe a few inches of that distance is going to be out of focus. So when you see those pictures where the birds are perfectly in focus and the trees are completely out of focus, that means that they had their aperture all the way to wide open. And there are times where you want that, and there are times that you don't. But you want to be aware is that's entirely an effect of aperture value. Small numbers, lots of light, but you're focused on one specific thing. Big numbers, where the aperture is closed, give you a greater depth, which means, yes, less light is coming in, but your field of stuff that's staying in focus is a lot broader. So I may have 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 feet or more of stuff that can stay in focus. So there's this constant there's a trade-off and a decision of, do I want to open it all the way up, let lots of light in, realizing that I can only focus on a few things, or do I want it all the way closed, knowing my depth of field is a lot bigger and a lot of stuff's more going to be focused, but I need more light. And sometimes you want effects. I do a lot of like bird and squirrel and chipmunk shooting and rabbits. I was just doing some rabbits this morning. And when I tend to take pictures of those particular animals, unless I'm doing something specific, I want just the animal in focus and everything around it out of focus. That's my kind of style. So I tend to do a lot of wide aperture items. So we've got the millimeters, That's how zoomed in or zoomed out it is. And the aperture size, which is a range, which is how big and small. And what you want to be aware of is if that bottom number is high, like 5 or 6, it's not going to work in low light conditions because you can't get enough light in. So, and if the top number is low, I've never seen that. They all go to 22 at least. But if you were to see one, be aware of that. That means that you can't work in bright conditions and you can't get that good depth of field. Those are the two big factors when you look at lenses, the millimeter size and the aperture size, aperture range. Now, there are a lot of other things that go into lenses and their prices. Now, there's one other thing you want to make sure of is that if you have a camera that does automatic focus, which most of them do these days, and does automatic aperture setting, which a lot of them do, make sure your lens supports that. Make sure it supports autofocus and make sure it supports aperture setting by the camera. The aperture setting is really, really easy. If you look at the lens and when you're looking at that little dial which lets you set the aperture, if it's got an A on the far end or a dot, that probably means that you can set the aperture with a camera. That's a lesson I learned. If it doesn't, it means it's a manual aperture setting, which means you have to do it by hand on the lens. Automatic focus, you have to ask, is this an automatic focus or not? In the name of the lens, when you're looking at its name, if it has AF, that's almost always stands for autofocus. In fact, I've never seen it anywhere else. So, which means it supports autofocus by the camera. In addition, there are a ton of other things that exist within lenses. Some lenses have their own internal autofocusing system in addition to the one that the camera has, and you can use the two. Some of them may have image stabilization, which we talked about during features, is image stabilization. There are tons of features. So what I do tell you is whenever you look at lenses, look at all the initials and figure out what each of those initials mean. And you can go out on the net and says, okay, if I am looking at Sigma lenses and I see HSM, what does that mean? And if I see ART, what does that mean? And if I'm looking at a Pentax lens and I see WR, what does that mean? Well, WR means weather resistant. If I'm looking at a Pentax lens and I see DA, that's designed for APS-C. And if it says DFA, it means it's designed for full frame. All you can do is look at those initials, read them and research them and figure out what they are. And good Google searches will do you wonders. You'll say Google, you do Google Pentax lens, what does FA mean? And it'll tell you. So those are the big characteristics of lenses. You've got the aperture, the focal length, and then all these added features which can make a lens a lot more expensive or a lot less expensive based upon what your needs are. Then let's talk about the types of lenses that are out there. The first type of lens I want to talk about is what they call a kit lens. A kit lens is a lens that typically comes with when you go out and you buy that camera the first time, it may come with what's called a kit lens. It's a relatively inexpensive lens, typically off-brand, not always, and it's going to be a zoom lens. Now, what do we mean by zoom? Zoom lenses are lenses that have their focal length, that millimeter range, is a range. It's not a single value, so it might be 70 to 200, might be 50 to 80, 50 to 105, might be 35 to 300. Kit lenses typically have a 70 to 200 millimeter range. And you can zoom in and out. And the reason why manufacturers put those with cameras is that way that you have a good basic solid lens that lets you do most of what you want to do. When you go out on the net, a lot of photographers really badmouth kit lenses. They say, yeah, I got this and I got a kit lens. And I will tell you that I've got a stack of kit lenses, not a stack, like 2 or 3 different kit lenses in my box of lenses. I happen to think they're great for beginners, which is that if you're taking photography for the first time, a kit lens is expensive. It may come with a kit, inexpensive. It may come with a camera, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, are they the best lenses in the world? Absolutely not. They're not the best lenses in the world, but they will fill your function. So think about a kit lens. Now, let's talk about when you go out and you buy more lenses, what options are there available to you? The first one's called a prime lens. A prime lens is a single millimeter focus lens, generally designed to be lightweight and relatively high quality glass, which means it takes really good pictures, but it is one focal length. It can go anywhere from, I think the smallest prime lens I've seen has been about 14 or 15 millimeters, all the way up to 400. I think I saw 1,000 millimeter one once. So prime lenses are single focus, tend to be very lightweight. The glass tends to be very high quality glass, and a lot of photographers like them because of their quality and the fact that if they know they want to shoot at a specific focal length, they work fairly well. Also, their aperture numbers tend to be a lot smaller. You can get into an affordable 50 millimeter 1.4 aperture lens for probably between $100 and $125, which when it comes to lenses is going to be cheap, as you discover. So you got prime lenses, you have zoom lenses. Zoom lenses are like kit lenses. They are ranged. Their aperture values tend to be higher. A zoom lens is typically considered to be a higher quality lens, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, about what we mean by quality. You also have, so you got prime lenses and zoom lenses. There are a couple of other types of lenses which fit in this category, and the first is called a wide-angle lens. These are lenses typically that have focal lengths less than 50 millimeters, sometimes even a lot lower than that, like I've got some 8s and 10s, that are designed for good wide shots. Really common for landscape photography is a good wide angle lens. On the opposite side, you have a telephoto lens. A telephoto lens is a single focal length high number, like 300, 400, or 500, and they're designed for getting in really close up, but they don't zoom. They're like, okay, I'm at 500 millimeters, and that's what I can shoot at. The advantage of a telephoto over a zoom is your aperture numbers tend to be a little bit better, and they tend to be lighter lenses because you don't have all those mechanics of zooming in and out that you do in a zoom lens. So you got wide angle, normal, and then telephoto. In addition to these, you'll see some wide-angle lenses label themselves as fisheye. I've got two. I've got two fisheye lenses. Fisheye lenses are extreme wide-angle lenses that distort the edges of the picture when you take it. So they look kind of bent and bowed at the edges. They're designed for really special effects. Once you get below about 15 millimeters, that focal length, once it starts to get below that, you tend to see a lot of fisheyes. I've got an 8. It's 8, which means for all practical purposes, it shoots 180 degrees. It shoots like this. It shoots the full 180 degree arc, and the lens actually bows out a little bit to get that effect. So you got wide angle, normal, telephoto, fisheye, and zoom. You got ultra zoom where you get like 1,000 or 2. We were actually joking about this on a list about 1,000 and 2,000 millimeter telephoto lenses. Really cool stuff. Okay, so we've talked about the characteristics, we've talked about types of lenses. Now let's talk about quality. Quality of lenses that you will learn is the glass and the features become really important. Cheap glass will give you work, but the colors may not be as vibrant. You might get graininess as a result. If you buy a cheap lens, odds are probably pretty good. Your pictures are not going to be as good as if you spend an expensive lens. It's just a matter of fact. So look at brands and learn brands that are good. I can tell you from my perspective, first of all, Leica lenses are outstanding, but Leica only makes lenses for Leica cameras that I'm aware of. So Leica lenses are good. Typically, the brand for the camera, so if you buy a Nikon lens, or if you buy a Canon lens, or if you buy a Pentax lens, those are going to be pretty good lenses as well, because the manufacturers have invested interest in making sure the camera and the lens work pretty well together and take good pictures. The other brand I'm going to use one example, but there are others out there, is I have a really fond likeness for Sigma lenses. It's a company called Sigma. They do affordable. Pentax lenses are very expensive. Sigma lenses are much more affordable. I'm finding the quality is just as good. In fact, they have some features that the Pentax lenses don't. So it's going to take research. Just go out and ask questions about, does anybody know about this brand? Does anybody know about this brand? And there are lots of Facebook groups, meetup groups. There's all sorts of places you can ask those questions. And take a survey saying, I'm thinking about buying a Tamron lens. What do people think about them? Or I've got a Rokinon lens. My 8mm fisheye is a Rokinon, which is not the best brand, but I got into an 8mm fisheye for less than $150. And if I had gone out and bought a Pentax 8mm, it would about $500 or $1,000 lens. Easily $500 or $1,000 for that type of lens. I got it for a couple hundred, and I've used it for some shooting, and it does a great job. Realizing the colors are not as vibrant, it doesn't have all the features that some of the other lenses have, but it's a great lens. So you want to think about the lens brand and the quality. So you got, let's go back through everything one more time. Aperture setting in millimeter size, wide angle, zoom, telephoto, and prime, what they call prime lenses. And then features, things like weather resistance, aperture priority setting, automatic aperture setting, automatic focus, and also, finally, the brand and its quality. These are all the things you need to consider. And when you look at, it's kind of funny because you look at two lenses. I was looking at two lenses the other day, and they were both one brand, and they were both 50mm, just 50mm, what they call prime lenses. And one was $100 and one was $500. And then I started looking at all those initials, and I realized, now I get it. Is that $500 lens had all these additional features that the $100 lens didn't. The $100 lens ended up being a manual lens, manual focus, manual aperture, and didn't have anything. It was a bare bones lens. This $500 lens would practically wipe your nose for you. Those are lenses. When we get into budget, which in a couple of videos we will do, be aware you're going to spend as much money, if not more money, on lenses than you are on cameras. Right now, I have 2 cameras, and I have 14 lenses, and I spent twice as much money on lenses as I have cameras. Now, that's because I'm going to turn around and I bought a whole bunch of lenses to try a bunch out, and then on eBay, I'm going to turn around and resell. I bought them on eBay, and I'm going to turn around on eBay, and we'll talk about buying in a little while. But yeah, you can tell it's the day after the debates, and my phone keeps going off. So those are lenses. Think about lenses. Think about what types of lenses. What would I get to start? Kit lens. I would always start with a kit lens. It's really convenient. I would think about a 50mm prime lens. That's kind of a pretty standard. Think about a wide. So those are the two I'd start. I'd get a kit lens and a 50mm standard prime. I'd think about a wide angle. And then depending upon that kit lens and how high that millimeter number is, I might think about getting a zoom that has a higher number. Like my kit lens was 70 to 200, and I bought a bunch of different zooms. One was a 11 to 55 with a lower aperture setting, so I get more light in. And I bought a 400mm, it's a 70 to 400mm telephoto lens by Sigma that zooms in. It's a zoom lens, a 70 to 400 zoom lens that everything comes in. Which reminds me, there is one more thing on all these features that I want to point out. I'm going to come back to that. I don't want to re-record all this. It's too long. Is some lenses will say macro. What does the word macro mean? When you see macro on a lens, it means you can get that camera really close to whatever you're shooting for taking pictures. And just look at what the focusing lens says. It'll typically say 6 inches, 18 inches, maybe a foot. If it's a macro lens, you can get really, really close, which is convenient, but it also typically means that focusing at larger lengths can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. Not a lot, but a little bit. So that's lenses. I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully it's useful to you. And I think in the next thing we're going to talk about, we talked about features, we're going to talk about accessories that you ought to buy, and that'll be a relatively short discussion. Okay, have a good day.